I think artificial intelligence can be both a beneficial tool for democracy, but also it can really undermine democracy if it's in the wrong hands or if it's used by people who don't understand it. And that is where I say the understanding of political leaders really needs to improve in a lot of cases for them to make decisions that are sensible around AI.
Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera, journalist, sociologist, and researcher. Today, diving with a special guest into, I would say, like a question that is pretty timely and complex, which is how basically can governments harness the economic power of artificial intelligence, but at the same time without undermining the democratic values that that governments themselves are meant to protect. And to help unpack this, I'm joined by Matthew Blakemore, who is the CEO of AI Caramba, upcoming keynote speaker at the e-governance conference of 2025 happening in May on May 28th, 29th, and connecting in this moment from Sarajevo. So, Matthew, welcome to the Digital Government Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
A little introduction to Matthew for everybody who's tuning in, because from basically reinventing fashion retail with AI-powered solutions or also like intervening on film classification through patented technology, Matthew's journey basically reflects very well this sort of like persistent drive that we need right now to make AI work for real impact and real human challenges, I would say. Also, in 2025, Matthew is actually launching his quote-unquote Snakes and Ladders AI framework, which I will ask you something about, of course, which is a practical guide for organizations to navigate, let's say, the terrain of AI implementation. Then beyond this, Matthew Blakemore is also recognized in the top 100 influential people of 2025 and the UK 40 under 40. So, Matthew, let's get right into that. How do we make AI serve the public good, I would say, and not the other way around? I would start with one question that is based probably on something that is quite familiar to everybody who's tuning in at the moment, and that definitely we've seen around not only maybe, I don't know, on LinkedIn, but also like in the documents that are being created and drafted at the moment, text, images, social media in general. And it is a moment of experimentation, I would say, that people are going through in terms of the approach and the first contact that they're having with artificial intelligence. What do I mean by that? Many people today are using AI tools, but I would say that this is done in a rather like exploratory way at the moment. So are we still maybe like experimenting with artificial intelligence? And in your experience, what do you think that it takes for individuals and organizations to move past, let's say, this stage of experimentation?
I think, from my experience working with a lot of organizations, both SMEs and large corporations, it's fair to say that the vast majority, especially when it comes to generative AI, are still in the R&D and experimentation phase. And what I would put that down to largely is because of the hype around the generative AI technology, companies have felt the need to almost rush into trying to implement something to show the value or find the value that it can offer them. And in some cases, they have negated the need for traditional product management that would look at tools strategically and where you can get the biggest benefits from artificial intelligence, for example. And so when you kind of don't follow that product management framework that's been traditionally used in technology projects, and you kind of jump into using tools, you can end up in a perpetual cycle of just doing R&D over and over again, because you're not thinking so strategically about what tools actually are the best ones for your organization. And so finding the value can be more difficult than if you set out to achieve a certain goal and implemented tools specifically to achieve that. And that I think is the difficult balance. So what we see at the moment is a lot of larger organizations actually have an innovation department, whose job it is to experiment with all these different tools, but then actually incorporating them into existing workflows or to overcome specific challenges is far more difficult. And so that's kind of the phase we're at with this generative tools. What I would say is ChatGPT got organizations thinking also about more traditional forms of AI, so machine learning and deep learning. And what I have witnessed with some businesses, which has been really encouraging, is those that have taken the approach of thinking strategically, um, have actually gone back and thought about, maybe this technology that was developed in the late 90s or early 2000s, so machine learning, deep learning, could actually offer us significant benefits, and that we haven't yet utilized. And so they've not just kind of thought about the generative models, they've actually considered other forms of AI as well, and optimized their processes and their data to support them. And so I think that it's really a mixed bag, but I would say the vast majority, as you've pointed out, are currently in that perpetual R&D phase of things. And certainly we do need to move into an actual implementation into workflows.
So definitely we can say that both public and private leaders need to exactly move from this like moment of hype, let's say,
Mm.
from the Studio Ghibli images, let's say,
Yes, yes.
to more meaningful outcomes. Let's put it this way. Obviously, like it's a generalization and a simplification, but
Mm.
just for the sake of the argument, we will allow that in this moment. But is this connected to the topic of the snakes and ladders? Because
Mm.
obviously, like reading that title, I was I mean, obviously curious to understand what are the snakes, where are the ladders, let's
Yes,
say.
yes.
But basically, what are the promises of this practical guidance
Mm.
for navigating AI adoption?
So when it comes to snakes and ladders, it's worth noting for every listener, just in case they're not from the United Kingdom and haven't come across the board game before, there is a very old board game that's been around in the United Kingdom for a long time called Snakes and Ladders. I think in the US it's called something else because I think it's Shoots and Ladders or something. But effectively, the board game is very simple. You go up the boards. If you land on a ladder, you go up, and if you land on a snake, you go down the snake. And it's complete luck. It's just a roll of the dice. What I have done with the Snakes and Ladders AI framework is taken um, the snakes and ladders from that board game that people are aware of. So the ladders, in terms of steps up that you can take to get an advantage, and the snakes, which are things to avoid, because they lead to you going backwards, to really frame clearly for organizations what steps they need to take to implement artificial intelligence effectively and responsibly. One of the challenges, I think, for organizations, and PwC have, in their recent research, found that only 11% of organizations are responsible when it comes to AI implementation. As I say, one of the challenges is for them understanding what responsible means and how they should be approaching these projects. And so what I'm trying to do is simplify it for organizations and also for teams that are put in charge of AI projects. One of the things that I've witnessed, um, both in the public domain and also in the private sector, is quite often people have been moved from traditional software development projects to artificial intelligence, so they're not necessarily aware of the differences around governance and responsible AI. And that can lead to challenges further down the line if they're not aware of the snakes that they need to avoid, and the steps that they can take from a ladder's perspective to actually speed up the progress of the project and also get to their end goal faster. And so I think that's the kind of purpose of the framework, to try and simplify things for organizations and for the public sector.
Yeah, because you've mentioned also private sector actors, such as business actors, let's
Mm.
say, such as small and medium enterprises, but also maybe consulting firms and companies
Yes.
that maybe are also like advising, let's say, governments and the private sector on AI implementation projects. And
Mm.
from this perspective that you just mentioned, I would say that generally the ladders are much clearer in sight, let's say,
Mm.
than the snakes,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes. I think that's absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. But I would say the ladders from a responsible AI perspective are not perhaps known because, if you take the example of Zillow, for example, from 2021. So Zillow or I think believe still are a company in the US, and at that point they created an AI solution for purchasing houses, and the whole purpose of that AI solution was to take over from their human team of buying houses at low cost and selling them for a higher cost. And because they weren't following a responsible AI framework, they didn't mitigate for the fact that the model over time would need training to ensure that it didn't to stray when the market changed. And so when the market did change, they lost £300 million because the model was purchasing houses for a higher price than they were worth, and then selling them for a lower price. And so actually it ended up with a significant problem for them. And I think that goes to show that there are steps in the ladders. So ensuring that you continuously train your models, for example, that companies might not be aware of. There is this thinking sometimes at C-level that you embark on an AI project, you develop the AI, and that's it. And actually, it's not. You need that continuous learning. You need to ensure that it remains accurate and relevant to the market that it's being used in. And so that's something that, as just a small example of how some of the ladders are less clear than others.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that it's interesting that we're diving into this realm, let's say, and topic like from this like perspective of driving economic growth, because this
Mm.
is going to be part exactly of your keynote at the e-governance
Yes.
conference of this year. Your keynote is titled indeed Artificial Intelligence Driving Economic Growth, Testing Democratic Governance. So I would instead now move to the second part of this
Yes.
title and ask you actually about governments
Mm.
now, because artificial intelligence is definitely like increasingly embedded in public services and civic life in different ways, not just in, I would say, not just in terms of how services are delivered, let's say the value chain that leads to a service delivery, but also maybe just in terms of how public sector employees are like communicating with each other, exchanging emails, communicating with the outside, maybe if they have to do it
Mm.
in another language, for example. And then obviously, I don't know, they go to, yeah, let's mention it, ChatGPT, and they put in a text, and then it results in an output that is perhaps often taken as, okay, this is the output, this is what the GPT said, so it must be correct, let's say,
Mm.
at least from a semantic, for
Yes.
example,
Yes.
point of view, while instead there are also things to reflect on there, I would say. So my question on this would be, given this increasing embeddedness of artificial intelligence in public service in
Mm.
general, let's say, how can then governments ensure that this integration then would actually reinforce democratic governance? I think this is exactly the part that you're going to focus on in terms of testing democratic governance
Yes. Yeah.
rather than undermining it, basically.
I mean, I think it's a really challenging topic, and there are a number of things that governments can do. I mean, first of all, one of the big challenges for governments in general, I believe, is in many cases a lack of knowledge from those who are in political power about artificial intelligence, and that's not their own failings. They've come from other fields. They might have been in politics their entire career, but that does mean that when it comes to a technology like AI that is going to have such a significant influence, and already is having a significant influence over democracy, there is really a need to educate and upskill those people in power to be able to make more sensible, accurate decisions when it comes to ensuring that artificial intelligence is used effectively for democracy. One of the reasons I got involved in AI standards was actually because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal during the Brexit debate. So that was not obviously using these generative tools that are available today, but it was using more traditional forms of artificial intelligence to collect data from Facebook and to form judgments about how easy people were really to manipulate, based on their data that they'd had from Facebook, and it was quite, for me, quite a challenge to get my head around how the government at the time had let that happen in the United Kingdom. And so one of the reasons, as I say, that I got involved in AI standards and have dedicated a lot of time to, especially the AI data lifecycle standard, which took 5 years to get through and is now a certified framework that's available for anyone to access. So it's an ISO AI framework. It's 8183 for anyone that's interested, and it's also been certified by the European standards body as well. And that really provides a framework for how you should manage a project responsibly, and what things you should not do. And one of the things, obviously, with the misuse of data that Cambridge Analytica had, was it significantly, I believe it significantly influenced the outcome of the Brexit referendum, which has obviously had significant impacts in the United Kingdom. And so I think artificial intelligence can be both a beneficial tool for democracy, but also it can really undermine democracy if it's in the wrong hands, or if it's used by people who don't understand it. And that is where I say the understanding of political leaders really needs to improve in a lot of cases for them to make decisions that are sensible around AI. I mean, I spoke to politicians at the time about Cambridge Analytica, and their response was quite often, "Oh, the public have spoken," which which is not very helpful when you're
No.
trying to explain to them how the technology had been used in a negative way. And so, this sort of thing, I don't think politicians can afford to have their heads in the sand when it comes to this technology and how it can be used to manipulate. And that's something that really does concern me.
I would say that just to add two things actually on what you just said. One is that the ISO that you referred to already actually has impacted AI governance in over 160 countries, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, yeah.
And then the second thing that I wanted to mention was that, yeah, probably when you ask that sort of question, let's say to politicians, there is a bit of a tendency to give in to plebiscitarianism, maybe we could say,
Yes.
in that sense, which always, let's say, serves consensus reinforcement and legitimacy, let's say, at least from their own point of view. Because then, at the same time, then we know that when it comes instead, for example, let's reprise a little bit the topic of the interaction, let's say, between us and generative AI, for example.
Yes.
An added layer of attention and perhaps even scrutiny, I would say, or at least a critical approach, must be put into the way that we interact with generative AI and artificial intelligence, also because there is, in any case, a sort of, it's a conversation. So it means that it's a chat, it's shaped as a chat as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
So there is definitely a feedback loop and a feedback effect between what we prompt, let's say, into the AI, the output that the AI returns to us, let's say, and
Yes.
then this conversation that keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. But obviously, I would say that it's not like our prompting is agnostic to the output that we receive from the AI. So what I'm referring to here is exactly the fact that artificial intelligence and generative AI tools are already kind of changing, let's say, the way that we think, the way that we work, perhaps even like the way that we express ourselves. I don't know. Like now we see so many, like a much higher frequency and occurrence, I would say, of even like words like pivotal, let's say, or like crucial, and something like this. It's not this. It's not just. It is like these formulaic expressions. Now I'm making obviously like simple examples here, but I think that examples that have been, let's say, before most people's eyes, and definitely before the eyes of most generative AI users. So this seems to be kind of a framework of co-evolution, no, and like a co-production of this human AI interaction. So something that I would ask you is, how can we exactly describe for the audience the feedback loops
Mm.
that happen in this human AI interaction? And do you see any ways that this kind of coevolution is already like unfolding, maybe in workplaces or perhaps even like policy domains?
Yeah, I think that it's with when it comes to coevolution, the technology is obviously at one level very easy to interact with for the public. So even if the public are not experts in artificial intelligence at this moment in time, they can go on to ChatGPT if they hear about it and they can have a conversation, and that's fine. That means it's easily accessible. But perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of these large language models is that they do hallucinate. So they do return responses that are not necessarily accurate, but they do so in a very, very convincing way. So recently, I was at a conference actually with AI experts, and I was quite surprised that even in that sort of crowd, a lot of people were still unaware of the challenges with large language models when it comes to hallucinations. And so I think what that demonstrates is that it's so important for the governments of today to actually educate the public. I mean, the World Economic Forum said, I think it was at last year's event, that 54% of the public needed upskilling to be able to deal with the changes that AI is bringing. I think it's actually more like 100%. I don't think that we can say that 46% of the public don't need upskilling. I think I don't believe it. And I think also, even if you're an AI expert today, if you don't continue upskilling yourself, you will not be an AI expert for very long, because the pace of change, especially in this field of generative AI, we've got now agentic AI and agent AI agents on the roadmap, and we've got these far more complex multimodal solutions now that are entering the market. And so if you are not constantly reading up on this technology, if you're not flexible and adaptable when it comes to your learning, then I think you're in for a rude awakening, unfortunately. And so that is a really important factor. I do believe that it's a responsibility of governments today to actually support the upskilling of their teams, but also of the general public as well.
Matthew, like you're making me think of an element that is instead a bit more related to public discourse, let's say in general,
Mm,
that maybe then like feeds into the way that people are currently, because we're talking about the present, of
of
course, like
course.
currently approaching artificial intelligence and the use of AI tools. And it's basically that, do you think I was mentioning, I said agnosticism before, so let's stay in the religious field,
Okay.
let's say, at least words wise. But do you think that there is maybe like some sort of ease to trust, if not, I would say maybe even like believe, let's say, a bit too easily into the outcomes and the outcomes of AI tools? Let's say the output,
Mm,
actually, this is what I wanted to say, the output of AI tools and large language models when they are returned, or let's say fed to us exactly as the result of some prompting process. Maybe I would say that perhaps we got to this point also because algorithmic decisions in general
mm,
have always been quite tough, let's say, to understand,
mm,
not just for the general public, but also like for specialists, or as we've said, also like for policymakers and decision makers. At the same time, I think that if we pair that with the fact that in any case, in the last perhaps 10, 12 years, there has been a pretty I would say not pretty strongly tech friendly discourse,
mm,
not just in terms of the technology itself, but also in terms of, I don't know, the fact that there is maybe like a manifest destiny of that tech companies and tech CEOs are bringing forward, the fact that they have in mind always, let's say, the best for humanity,
mm.
and always like this positivist, ultra optimist, let's say, approach to what, in any case, it's always private companies doing, let's say. Like, do you think that these elements somehow, exactly from this point of view of like culture and discourse in society, are also having an impact in the way that we are, that we are framing our own relation, basically, when relationship with large language models, AI in general, and and what we expect from it, basically, from in the next years.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that of course the discourse around tech for good and the positive use cases of this technology have influenced the public's interest 100%. Um, I think also though the fact that these models are becoming increasingly realistic in terms of how they communicate with us, in the sense that I don't know if you've tried Sesame AI's model Maya, for example, which really took the internet by storm when it was launched. Because it sounds like you're having a conversation with another human being, and it's very, very realistic. And so when you get to this point where you're having a discussion with an AI that sounds incredibly like a human being, in the same way that a human can influence another human being, AI, when it's communicating with you like that, can be increasingly convincing. And actually, I just did my TEDx talk, which hasn't been launched yet, but will be shortly, on love and AI and how it's possible for people to fall in love with these AI models, and people have fallen in love with these AI models because psychologically, when they're communicating with you in such a way that it feels like you're having a discussion with a human being, um, it affects you. So I actually conducted some neuroscience experiments around the impact it has, and did a live demonstration on stage. Um, and it's quite fascinating to look at the neuroscience behind the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence and how we're interacting with these models. And so I do think that especially with governments and private companies looking at utilizing large language models internally, they do need to think about this relationship that is being built between their human team and the AI tools, and try to understand how they can optimize that and avoid situations that could be potentially problematic.
Yeah, and this definitely, considering that e-governance academy is an organization that hails from Estonia, then definitely matters also to Estonia as a country and as a society overall, considering that the country has just recently announced and launched this new Tiger Leap project that basically aims to to form, let's say, and train the next generations into being not just anymore, let's say, digital native, but
Mm,
also AI native in a way.
yes.
So bringing artificial intelligence into schools, but then what does this mean? Like, there are also many other aspects that need to be taken into account, and the love with AI, or love for AI, was also the one that I was thinking in connection, maybe also like to, there is another one next to that, that is the fact that many people, for example, are turning to ChatGPT for therapy counseling.
They are, yeah, and that's dangerous as well because I believe there's a form of AI, and I can't remember its title exactly. I think it might be characters AI or something, but some where you can create characters you can interact with, and there are therapists on there or AI created therapists that claim to be, when you're having a conversation with them, real therapists, and that is a problem because obviously they are not real therapists, and so I do believe that artificial intelligence tools, so Perplexity, ChatGPT, can help you to, as a human being, formulate your own responses to certain things that happen in your life. Absolutely, but should they be relied upon as a therapist? I don't think they should. And again, this is a point when it comes back to educating the public about how they should use these tools, what the limitations of these tools are, and not taking everything that they hear from these tools as factually correct. And I think that is so important.
I would say that then we need to, allow me the word pun, keep the perplexity, preserve a healthy amount of perplexity, let's say,
Yes.
towards AI and the use of AI tools. And someone who's definitely doing that, perhaps as it is quite often said, actually, it's exactly the European Union
Mm.
and European institutions, because against, let's say, this tech for good general narrative, then at the same time it is often said that the European Commission, or in Europe in general, there is while obviously we would say that here there is this like a balance is
Mm.
being thought, let's say, between the rapid innovation and at the same time regulation,
Yes.
then there are many instead who are saying, ah, no, but in the European Union, they're like, putting so many obstacles, let's say, around innovation that they don't allow innovation to grow and go forward and stuff.
Mm.
But at the same time, one question on that would be, so we've learned and we know that definitely we need to critically look at AI tools in this sense,
Yes.
and at how and in what domains of life and society
Mm.
they are integrated, with what output, with what outcomes, with what societal outcomes at large,
Mm.
because we use these models individually, but many individuals in a group using the model then make a societal outcome,
Yes.
of course. But in your opinion, how do we avoid maybe over-regulating too early? Because I'm thinking, for example, of the AI Act,
Mm.
that now it's already actually kind of being put into discussion in some of its elements
Yes. Yes.
in Brussels and around Europe. But then on the other hand, how do we ensure that trustworthy artificial intelligence, let's say, is not just a matter of branding, but something that actually can fruitfully shape this relationship and the perception and of trust, let's say,
Mm.
that we have in approaching AI tools and using them.
Of course. No, I think actually the EU gets a lot of criticism for over regulating, but in fact, I think the work that they have done on the EU AI Act is invaluable and is a really useful roadmap for so many companies in understanding the risks of artificial intelligence, because we don't talk about the risks enough. And understanding what is a high risk AI, what is a low risk form of AI, and what you need to consider, it's an incredibly useful guide from that perspective. What I would say is the EU, it's full of very clever people, and they understand that now they've got this framework in place. They've had a look at how it's impacted businesses, and they can see that, especially from an SME perspective and a startup perspective, that it's very difficult for startups to adhere to all aspects of the EU AI Act and other acts as well, that they need to within the EU, and that's putting them at a slight disadvantage when compared to more open markets, like I would say the US, with slightly less regulation, for example. And so now what the EU is doing is looking at how they can deregulate for SMEs and for startups to basically ensure sovereign innovation can proceed and encourage sovereign innovation. They've also invested more recently in AI factories to try and ensure that Europe is the home of the next big AI breakthrough. And I think that those sort of approaches now can actually have a significant impact on how the continent is perceived. Because yes, it started with the EU AI Act and it started with regulation in this area, which I don't think was the wrong approach, having seen what happened with Cambridge Analytica, to be perfectly honest. I think that work was incredibly valuable. But now, of course, when you see something like that in action, there will be teething problems and there will be things that you need to look at and you need to review and assess. And so at this point, I think they're just getting the balance right, to ensure that innovation can proceed in the continent, and that we're also able to ensure this transparency, as you say, and this security for the public in Europe too.
We have mentioned many social phenomena. We've mentioned also many places, like geographically speaking,
Mm.
which actually I think exactly points to the fact that in any case, the digital sovereignty, for example, that we were just talking about,
Mm.
and also the use of AI, where it is happening, in which domains, and how it is actually geopolitically situated as well,
Mm.
which means that in any case, the place and the approaches where they happen, the place where they happen, the country where they happen, or the geo-economic area, let's say, where they happen, uh, all of this does matter.
Yes.
And with this, I would then reconnect to the title exactly of your upcoming keynote at the e-governance conference of this year. The conference in general has this title of From Bites to Benefits.
Mm.
No? So we're going to look into raising prosperity through digital transformation. And exactly a component of the title of your keynote is exactly about driving economic growth.
Yes.
And then obviously there is this other aspect of democratic governance. So governments and economic growth. I would say, considering that artificial intelligence has already become, in any case, because we're discussing it so much, but it has come to be quite pervasive, let's say,
Mm,
within the economy and society as a whole, we can definitely consider it a core layer of economic and geopolitical competition as well.
mm.
And that's why we were talking about digital sovereignty. So, how do you think that, for example, smaller nations or even mid sized economies, not necessarily smaller nations, in the same way as, for example, in the beginning, we were talking about small and medium enterprises
Yes.
as well, how can these actors, both in the public and private sector, how can they retain some agency in this context instead of just adopting tech that is built elsewhere, or instead of just being more like objects of history rather than subjects of history
Yeah.
in this
I
context?
I think, you know what, it's a very, very challenging area because yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. This is effectively a similar situation to, I would say, a Cold War almost when it comes to AI, because uh, th- there are countries and territories competing to be the leader in this space, and there are security benefits to being the leader in this space. There are power benefits to being the leader in this space, and so you've got, US, China, Japan, and other territories as well, all providing very different regulatory frameworks to try and encourage innovation in their own territories. And it's how the smaller territories react to that, and how perhaps they can collectively work together to compete rather than just be perpetual takers of foreign technology, that will really determine their future. And I think that the United Kingdom, where I'm from, is actually in a very interesting place at the moment, because we're having a lot of consultations around the creative industries. And obviously, one of the big challenges we have at the moment globally is that a lot of the leading Gen AI models have been trained on data that was not necessarily used with permission from the creatives who put it online. And the issue there is, with the way that it's been spoke about in the UK through the Fair campaign, it's been spoken about as like, oh, if you return to this, write a response to this consultation in the United Kingdom, we can stop big tech using creatives data to train their models. But it doesn't take into consideration the fact that in the UK, there's very little Gen AI training happening. Even Stability AI, one of our leading Gen AI companies in the UK, do their training in the United States, because they feel there is, with the fair use framework they have over there, more of a legitimate argument for using data that is available online, without needing to get licenses for it. And so we're in this situation at the moment where I think there's potentially misunderstanding about how far individual territories' copyright can reach, but also um, what creatives and what others can do to try and ensure that they are fairly remunerated. And I do think that the industry, the AI industry, actually has a responsibility as well. I think the likes of OpenAI have a responsibility to try and ensure that the general public, whose data they have benefited from, can now have ways of getting remunerated for particular aspects of the project. And that could be, for example, if their names are used in a prompt, that it triggers remuneration for that particular individual. Premium prompts is something I spoke about last year at Cannes Film Festival as a way forward, because if data has been used to train these models, then that doesn't mean that that's the only place that remuneration can happen. Actually, I think remuneration can happen further down the line, when people are prompting, and also, with retrieval augmented generation as well. So RAG, which is used a lot now to improve the responses of large language models. If a model is scraping your website to obtain highly useful, I mean, you're a journalist, so you've got accurate information out there. If it's scraping your articles to produce a better quality response, then I believe there should be a way for you to partner with the company doing that and be remunerated when it does so. And actually, Perplexity, one of the leaders in this RAG mechanism world, has actually started forming partnerships with a lot of companies, and that includes in Europe as well. So a lot of the German media companies are now partnered with Perplexity so that they get paid when people ask a question and it retrieves data from their websites. And I think that is an interesting way forward. And I do think, as I say, the industry have a responsibility. And as someone in the AI industry, I do believe that companies that have now built these models do need to start thinking about how can we get the public more on side? Because there is undoubtedly this tension at the moment with much of the creative sector about how these foundational models have been built.
So we've got today a bit of a taste, let's say, of what the snakes and ladders of AI use and implementation are. An antipasti, I would say, in my mother tongue.
Yes.
And Matthew, then thanks a lot for joining us today in this podcast episode. It was super interesting and definitely a great introduction to the keynote that you're going to have. I will say it again, at the e-governance conference 2025 in Tallinn, and also available in hybrid format on artificial intelligence, driving economic growth and testing democratic governance. Matthew, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And thanks a lot also to everyone in the audience who tuned in. The memo is exactly that. eGov 2025 is happening on May 28th and 29th, as I said, in the hybrid format. And you can find all information, tickets, program, speakers, concept note, themes, everything about it at 2025.egovconference.e. That's it also for you from your host for today, and make sure to tune in to the next episode.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.